Okay, well, we'll get going. Thanks everybody for joining us today. It's good to have a good crowd together and to be able to talk you all through some of our invoicing processes, and particularly we're going to drill down to self-billing, which quite looking forward to doing for this audience, which even as a finance professional is not something that I say every day. But just to cover off introductions first, so on the webinar with us, we have myself, I'm Kevin Berry, I'm the Finance Director here at Bloom Procurement Services. We have Ben Darragh, who is our Pro-vide product owner. We have Barney Markham, who is our Operations Director, which can help us out with the Q&A at the end of the webinar. And we have Alex Wright, who is our Senior Marketing Executive. So really the purpose of today is just to run through the overall kind of downstream process we have within Bloom that leads to our invoicing. And then I will take us through that process and drill down specifically into the self-billing aspect of it. And then Ben will take us through a short demo of the invoicing portal where the self-billing invoices are stored and how you can access that. And as we go through the webinar, if you do have any questions, please just pop them into the Q&A box and we will run through those questions as much as possible at the end. And if there are any we can't answer in the time or we need to do a bit more digging into, we will address those questions afterwards offline, but we will work through them all. So thanks very much. We'll get started. So initially, just to run through a high-level version of, as I say, our downstream process. So this is very much further into the process. It assumes by this point, you have gone through our full accreditation process. You've been awarded a piece of work, and you are in the midst of delivering that work to the end buyer. So the first real action for you guys as suppliers of ours in that process is once you reach a milestone or a scheduled payment that's agreed within that works order, you log into our Pro-vide portal and you submit the relevant service delivery plan, or SDP as we call them for short. And you do that by logging into the Pro-vide portal and accessing the specific work plan it relates to. It's not a process we're particularly going to drill into through this webinar, but there is a video tutorial of that process on our YouTube channel, should you wish to access that. And this audience again could answer questions around that process at another date if required. So that SDP that you guys submit at that point, usually covers an update on the project. It covers the value of the work that's been delivered to that point, or the value of that milestone. And you submit that along with any other details that the buyer requires you to do so at that time. That goes through a process which it is then available for the buy-in authority to review. And they're checking that in terms of the content, the value that's been submitted, does it meet with their requirements, and if they got any follow-up questions before they want to approve that step and that submission. And assuming everything is fine, the buyer then goes on to approve that process. They do have the option to reject it, but there is quite a rare occurrence actually throughout this process. It's managed quite well to this point so that we don't see an awful lot of rejections. And that approval is quite an important step, because that is the point that triggers invoicing and starts the various forms of payment terms we have as a business. So it is all kind of hinged around that approval step. And the fourth box on your screen there, the invoicing box, is what we're going to drill into a bit more detailed after this, specifically focusing around the self-billed invoice. And that really on that approval, it triggers three actions on Bloom's part. It triggers an invoice sent from us to whoever the buying authority is in relation to that specific piece of work. It then, in relation to you guys specifically as suppliers, it triggers a management fee invoice from Bloom to yourself, and it triggers a self-billed invoice that we raised on your behalf to Bloom, effectively your sales invoice to Bloom. And then from there, that feeds through to our payment process, of which there are a couple of variations of payment terms, but by and large, most are either 30 days from that approval date or pay when paid plus a 14-day window for ourselves. So as an overview, that is our downstream process. And as I said, the focus really today is to drill into that invoicing step, and more specifically the self-billing process that sits within it. In the context of self-billing for Bloom as a business, is that a large proportion of our supply base are SMEs or small micro entities. So we look to have this as an automated service and an automated solution as much as possible. And that feeds through to the fact that, the people in that scenario, although it doesn't apply to everybody, specifically some of our, bigger suppliers, as some of which probably relates to you guys on the call, it takes away the admin side of the process for them as well. And actually the whole thing is taken care of by the Bloom service. So we raise that invoice on your behalf to us. And as we said, this is us effectively creating what is your sales invoice. And we are doing that on the basis of the self-bill agreement that has all been signed and agreed as part of the accreditation process. And that invoice specifically is downloadable from the Pro-vide 2 portal, which Ben will show you later on toward the end of this webinar. And I guess kind of down the right hand side of the slide, you'll see some points about really why is that important to you, and how can that help yourselves and us with some of the questions and queries we see kind of on a daily basis from our supply base, which is kind of what led to this webinar coming about. So I mean, the self-bill reference really throughout this whole process is key. And, ideally, in terms of best practice, that self-bill invoice reference is something that you should be taking and recording in your finance system, or sort of at the very least have a central log where that invoice reference can be tied back to any internal references or any separate processes you have running internally to help line the two up and put them side by side. And from my experience, and this is only my opinion, it's not formal advice, but that is what HMRC would expect to see. And quoting that invoice, that self-billed invoice reference, will dramatically reduce the amount of time it takes the Bloom finance team and the wider business across Bloom to respond to any queries you may have. So that reference really underpins a lot of the process, as the reference that flows through the various systems and platforms we use. And again, it is a reference that HMRC would probably expect you to quote as well. Similarly to that, the reference is also linked directly to our payment remittance advices. So any payment breakdowns or remittance advices you receive from the Bloom finance team will quote those self-billed invoice numbers within it. And very, very similarly, there's you can see a theme emerging here. There is a link between that reference and the management fee invoice we issue to yourselves as well. And that effectively is the self-billed invoice reference, usually with an MF reference on the end to denote that it is a management fee invoice from us to yourself. And they are two separate transactions. And that reference really does feed all the way through those processes, and is quite key to this process and being able to tie things together further down. So hopefully that is helpful and gives you some insight into that. And these are just some extracts directly from the self-billing agreement that is included in the accreditation process, just to give you all the full context and the full picture. So, the key points to clarify here, in the regard of this agreement, the customer is Bloom. We are your customer in this regard, and you yourself are denoted as the supplier. And the key parts of this for me are kind of point two under the customer's part of the charter, the agreement, is that Bloom is agreeing to raise self-billed invoices on your behalf with all the correct details and all the correct VAT requirements that make up a valid VAT or a valid invoice document, depending on the registration status of your own business. And that really is kind of one of the key pullouts for us and part of our process. And in relation to you guys, as the supplier, the first 2 points within this are key to the process working correctly for me. The first one, to accept the invoices raised by the self-biller is, Bloom, and to use those references and those documents wherever required. And the second one really is also key, and it's probably worth a bit discussion, and it is always quite difficult. And these are standard HMRC words that are fed into this document. So point 2 there under the supplier part of the agreement, not to raise a sales invoice for the transactions covered within this agreement. Now that, in practical language, and again, this is just my opinion, it's not tax advice by any stretch of the imagination, but HMRC, from my experience, have always been very accepting that practically most people now run modern systems, that it's impossible to prevent something happening internally, some kind of document being raised, some kind of trigger at the end of a process that records a sale. So in essence, I've seen that applied in practice as, that is raised for internal purposes. It's part of an internal process, but it's not something that's distributed externally. It's not something that's referenced externally. And it is very much an internal reference. And where I've seen it applied in those scenarios, and I've seen that in SMEs and Fortune 500 companies, nobody that I've come across has fallen foul of that step, but it is a key one, and it is something that sometimes when people review this agreement, they think is difficult to agree to or difficult to adhere to, but that's certainly how I've seen it applied in practical terms. Moving on, this is an example of what that self-billed invoice within our portal looks like. So it covers everything you would usually expect to see, and and when we implemented this and the self-building agreement, it was largely based on advice we took at the time from some Big Four accounting firms and HMRC themselves as part of a HMRC inspection we had as a business. There is no particular concerns, but it's certainly fed into this document and how it was designed to make sure that we address these things in a compliant manner. So it covers, as I say, everything you would expect to see. Your name and address that you have, your registered business, any VAT numbers that are related. Again, that supplier invoice reference number that I keep referring to is in the top right section of this document, and this document, as I say, is downloadable from the Pro-vide 2 portal that Ben will show you imminently. And again, it covers the value, a description of the milestone, a description of the project, a kind of specific piece of work it relates to, the values, the net values, the gross values, the VAT breakdown. Everything you would expect to see on an invoice is included in here. And again, this is all downloadable kind of at your own convenience, as and when you go through the invoicing process. But it is only available once we get beyond that approval step in the process, as we walk through. So that third box, that approval box in the process, that part of the process does need to be complete before we get to this point. So, a key phrase that's within this in terms of self-billing to ensure that it is compliant is that, it does state that the VAT shown on these is your output tax. So it's your sales invoice, it's output tax, and that's how it should be recorded as on your VAT returns. And moving on through, just some kind of key takeaways and recaps for me before I hand over to Ben. And I guess the first part of this is come as no surprise based on the narrative I've had so far. That reference really is key. It flows through all of our systems, all of our processes, and all of the documents that we send out to yourselves as suppliers of our business. We quoted on that self-billed invoice number. It flows through to the payment advices. It flows through to the management fee invoice. It helps with internal reconciliations. It speeds up the response to questions and queries and answers. And based on best practice and the advice we've had to date, it is that reference we have to go by, and we're not able or looking really to store any internal references that you guys have internally, and the emphasis of the process is very much on this self-billed reference being recorded within your organizations to be shared and used with us and HMRC if required. And in terms of the document, the document, again, the invoice date, I didn't mention the document previously actually, but that the date will match up with the date that the approval was given by the buying authority for these transactions. And you can often use that date to give you an indicative idea of a payment date. Generally, most of our terms fall within a kind of 30-day window of that approval date. So you can use that date to link that through and make a kind of broad assumption around when you might expect to be paid for that piece of work. And again, you know, that invoice document is something that HMRC would expect to see should they want to audit or inspect any of your processes with that. So that's pretty much from me. We've done a lot of talking about invoicing and particularly invoice numbers. So I think it would be very useful now if I hand over to Ben, and Ben will take us, as I say, into that portal and show us how it's accessed and how it works. Over to you, Ben.
Okay, good morning, everyone. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview on getting set up with the system first off, and then I'll take you through accessing it and viewing it at the same time. So when you are set up on the Bloom Pro-vide 2 sourcing system, we will at the same time be inviting you out to a separate system, which is the finance portal. So the first thing to say is we have the sourcing system, which you should all be aware of in terms of where you're going to go, tender for work and manage the projects, SDPs and the milestones. We will also send out an invite to the finance portal at the same time when you are set up with your account with us. And now that will go to the key account holder. So within that step, you'll first get a registration to Pro-vide 2. You'll get an email confirming your accreditation, and then you will have also received an invitation to the finance portal. Now, depending on where you sit on within your own businesses, that will go to the key account holder. So some of you may, your key account holder will have set up the finance portal, and then there is the opportunity to then invite you into the portal later down the line, which I will show you. Others may have missed this in the process, so won't have set yourselves up. So I will share our email address to Pro-vide 2 later on in the day at the end of the slides. So you can contact me and we can let you know if you do have a finance portal, and if not, we can resend the invite out to you. So to do that, it's very straightforward. We're just going to click onto the registration. You will then be asked, it will pre-fill with your name, a title, add in your phone number. You're going to have your email address to confirm, and then your passwords and key account information. Once you've accepted the terms and conditions, that will go through and you'll be able to then go directly into our portal. Now I'm going to show you on an existing within our test website to give you an example of what it actually looks like. So once you've logged in with your details, which will be sent to you, you will land on the landing page. And within here, the main navigation has some basic aspects. So we've got on the left-hand side here, the orders icon, which is going to go into your sales orders and sales invoices, which I'll show you in a second. And then our other key bit is around managing users and sending new user requests. So the key account holder will get the login to this site. And then if anyone else within finance teams or elsewhere within your business wants access to it, they can then be added and invited into the portal. In reference to the ID, so if you do happen to know the invoice ID that you're looking for, you can search for that using the quick search within here. That's going to take you directly into the invoice itself. So if you know it, you can quickly jump in. You can then click onto the invoice ID. That's going to give you an overview of the invoice, the lines within the invoice and the total values as per you would expect for a normal invoice setup. You can see if there's any messages. Now these would have been sent during the process of the invoicing, any attachments and also a history. But the key bit here is you can also then download your e-invoice as well. And this relates to the structure that Kevin's just showed you there in terms of what's been included. Now there's a number of ways of also finding invoices and finding sales orders as well if you don't know the IDs. So the first off, if I go into the orders icon at the top, and search for a sales order. So these are actually going to be all of your sales orders that have been as part of any agreement with Bloom that you can access here as a history. So when you come on to set up your account, Even if you've been with us or have projects with us for a long period of time, any of your historical sales orders and invoice will be accessible via the portal. So you can access in a long list. There's a number of filters that you can apply to view all of those orders. And we have as well PO reference, sales order invoice numbers, and some filters around dates as well. When you go into one of those sales orders, you're then going to see, again, high level information and the payment schedule lines that are built from the work order as per agreed as part of the project. So any sales orders will show up within the portal as soon as the work order is signed and we generate the supplier development plan, the SDP. These will then be visible within your portal. Now, obviously, we have a number of IDs here. There's a sales order number and the PO number that are our references. You can then also search for the project name as well. So if you search using the project name, that will bring up the sales order, and then you can click within it. And if you want to access the invoices that are sat below that have been generated as part of a project, you can then access those directly within the invoicing tab at the top. And then you can click in and see the invoices themselves below that. So that's one way of you being able to access it. We can then also go back in and use any of the other filters. Now, if we know an invoice number and we want to access it, we're not sure of the sales order, you can search using the invoice number. And again, that will then bring you up into the sales order information. So within here, we have status, which is just going to give you an overview of that project. You've got your milestones that are linked to our service delivery plans below, the values and the total value. We can then go into some further detail around the sales order, tax statuses, and other information. Any revisions? Now, this may have happened following a CCN or an update to the PO as sat within our system, so you can see those revisions and access any information on that as well within there. The PO documentation and then invoices. So they're the key elements that you're going to see within there. Now, again, you can do similar for sales invoice as well. So if we go back into the orders tab and go directly to invoices and search for a sales invoice, you're going to see a long list of all of your invoices covering all of your projects. So again, you can search if you know the invoice number, you can search directly. And again, you're going to go direct into that and you can download. So often the easiest way, if you've got project level information, is to actually go into the sales order level. You can search for a project and drill down. So again, if I search on a name or a starting name, I can access that. If you've got a project ID, they will be searchable as well. You can go in and find your invoices and work from there. Now, again, when you're set up as part of the onboarding process, the access to this, as I said and mentioned, will go to your key account holder, so the person whose name's linked to the account when registered. Often that's not going to be the best person who's going to actually manage in terms of the invoices and the reconciliations within finance teams. So to do that, we can just add in new users. So within here, we can fill out basic information, very quick and easy. Anyone could then be added in. You can be given a role, and then you send an email request. That's going to blank because of the country code. So making sure the email request, the country code's in, and also that it's a business applicable email address. You're going to send that user request, and that user will get an email, and they'll be able to process similarly to the emails we've received earlier. So that's the basic of the portal. If you do have any queries, and we've got the email address at the end, please do get in touch, and I can, as I say, let you know if you've got access already within the business, and if not, we can resend out invites so you can process that. And I'll hand back over to Kevin to pick up the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Ben. So we've had a handful of questions in that we'll run through now. If anybody else does have one, feel free to add them into the box. And if not, we do have a slide with some contact details that we'll put up at the end. Feel free to contact us via the appropriate channel as well. And this webinar, I'm looking at Alex tonight, is being recorded, so we will share the link, and it will be posted to the YouTube channel should everybody want to watch it back or is frantically making notes. It is being recorded, so it will be shared via process. So the first question we have, I think I can probably tackle, is the self-bill invoice raised on behalf of the supplier sent to the supplier? It's not sent out by email at present. You know, the question is, it's very much downloadable from the portal, and that is the method that we have available for people to access those invoices at the moment. It may be something we look at in terms of a future roadmap, but at this moment in time, it's not possible, and they are simply downloadable from the portal. Ben, anything to add to that?
No, yeah, that's right.
So second one is, can we download the invoice from the Pro-vide portal? I'd previously been advised I couldn't self-save and had to go through the link person at Bloom. Absolutely, as Ben's just showed us and walked us through, you can download that invoice yourself at your own leisure. You can download the history of invoices that's within there, and they are accessible, until the system no longer exists effectively. So they are all accessible within there to download. And should for any reason you not be able to get in there or download them, feel free to reach out to the Pro-vide2 at bloom.services email below, and Ben will pick those queries up if there is any issues. Next one on the slide, it was mentioned self-bill can be downloaded from Pro-vide2. Yeah, very similar. So yes, we can. If you need access or you need a link, please reach out to Ben on the Pro-vide2 email that's there, and we'll get you a link to that portal. It may be that somebody else in your organization has access and we just need to get it shared amongst the correct group. So absolutely, we can address that for you. The next one, Ben, this might be one for you. The 2 different logins to the portal, could they be merged, and is there any kind of potential to do that?
Yeah, so that is on our roadmap at the moment. It is 2 separate logins. The reason for that really is around security. So because it's sort of secure financial information, actually there's a separate login currently, and also that access to that information is often going to be targeted different users or different people or different teams. But we are looking at the potential, to have a single sign-on option, so you're not having to remember 2 logins.
The next one, again, very much similar. I've never had access to the finance portal, only the SDP submission. Absolutely, please get in touch with us specifically, and we'll check the access for your organization, whether somebody else has it and we need to get it shared, or whether you need some access created for you. But absolutely, we can resolve that pretty easily and pretty quickly. Next one, again, Ben, this might be one for you. Could you include the project name on a project when we get the references of a PO or a sales order? We don't know which project it relates to. I think the answer is yes, that is in there, and it is searchable by project name as well. But Ben, is there anything to?
Yeah, so the project, the project name and ID will be on the invoices, and then when it comes through on the PO as well. So you can search by all of that and the project ID, which you should have, as long as the projects are all set up. That is all fully searchable within the portal. Yeah.
Yeah. Similarly, we throw project descriptions through to management fee invoices and other documents we send out now as well. The next one, what's the process of adding change orders to the portal in order to submit an SDP? Ben or Barney, I don't know if you're best placed to answer that.
In terms of a change order, as in a CCN, yeah. So currently that would go through come through to procurement operations, and they'll be able to process that for you. We are at the moment just updating our platform so that there is a form directly, so you can submit a change order through that form, and that will come through for us for processing. So at the minute, direct into ProcOps, and they'll be able to start that process off through the project's email, and be able to start that process off for you. Shortly in the next sort of Q1 of next year, we'll have a direct form so you can upload, and we'll process that for you.
Yeah, worth noting that actually it's not on this contacts page, but project@bloom.services is the central inbox for that procurement operations team that Ben's referring to there. So that's projects@bloom.services. When does the system become live? It's already live. It's there. We've been using this process in the system since earlier on this year. So if you do require access, Bal, feel free to again reach out, and we'll make sure that you've got the right access that you need. Is it possible to have an internal reference number quoted back to us when a payment is made? This is how it used to work under the previous Pro-vide system, and the removal of the functionality in Pro-vide 2 creates internal admin for us to resolve this. This is probably the number one question we get asked at Bloom in the finance function on a regular basis. One of the reasons we made the change between Pro-vide 1 and Pro-vide 2 was on the advice we had from a big four finance firm, accountancy firm, and HMRC about kind of best practices with this process and how it needs to center around the self-billing process for compliance reasons. So it's not possible, and it's not something we're actively pursuing at this time. And the focus is on bedding in the self-bill process correctly to ensure that that self-bill reference is recorded correctly on our side and on your side, to make sure that things do flow through and are easy to reconcile. And I think if you have a specific problem, it might be worth us talking it through in more detail, and you can get me through the accounts at bloom.services route if needed. We have a question from Claire. Please, can you let me know who to email to get access? Yeah, sure. If you drop that to the Pro-vide 2 at bloom.services address, we can get that sorted out for you, and we can pick up that access. Similarly, for the web address for the portal, we can share those via email as well.
Yeah, and that's on the invite when it comes out, but I would suggest favoriting that as well when you do get it, and you go in and create your account, so you've got that there for future reference.
Yeah, the next question actually relates to the handover between Pro-vide 1 and Pro-vide 2. They've got access to the portal, but it doesn't have the backlog of invoices from Pro-vide 1, and that is correct. So they are not stored within the Pro-vide 2 invoice portal. We do have them all logged and registered internally within Bloom. It was an anonymous question, but if you do need access to any historical documents that you missed, then feel free to reach out and we can have those shared with you. Absolutely. How do you know when an invoice is approved? I'll pass this over to Ben, but I believe there's an automated notification that comes via the system.
Yeah, there is a notification that will come that the line has been completed, and it does have that within the body of the email. It does come from a system email, which means it's sometimes missed within other inboxes. We are just tidying that up as well to improve it, just to make it a lot clearer, so you are definitely aware of when it has been approved. And you can also look at the buyer line as well to confirm that. As soon as it has been approved, the invoice will drop in as well. Once the integration is run and processed, that invoice will be immediately visible within the finance portal, so you can see it within there and below the sales order and the individual payment schedule line. So yes, you do get a notification. We're tidying those up to make them a little bit clearer, so just keep an eye out for system emails from the Pro-vide 2 email account.
And the final question we've got currently is that they're struggling and they sometimes find the system not very intuitive. Are we consulting with users to make things more user-friendly? Ben, do you want to talk about anything that's on the roadmap or could be considered for the roadmap?
Yeah, we're aware that some of the user experience and some of the UI does need to be improved. We're currently testing a new template for the SDP. So in terms of you recording the milestone information and giving the billing amount, that should just be a lot easier in terms of what that looks like in the ordering and the ease of use. We're aware as well of some of the challenges in terms of finding the SDPs, what's been approved and what's not been approved within your supplier dashboard on the sourcing side. So we've got some working with the system provider to look at tidying that up and organizing that better, and as well managing better alerts out of the system, so you're a lot clearer on what's happened and when, and particularly around the approval and when the invoice is generated and then when the payment is due. What we don't have in the supplier finance portal side at the moment is the pulling back through the payment date or the due payment date. And there is some work going on at the minute to look at pulling that information out, so that'll show as well on the invoice, against the invoice, when the payment is due from our finance side. So that work we're looking at again in Q1 next year. We're looking to make those changes, and we will provide further communication on what's happening with that and as well. And as well in Q1 next year, we've got a load of new support videos that will go onto our YouTube channel. So breaking those down into kind of the full sort of flow steps from getting accredited right through to tendering for a project, approving SDPs on the finance portal as well. So there will be a number of more videos there to act and provide greater support for you as well.
Well, that brings everything we have up to now to a close. Thanks very much for getting involved, listening to the webinar and what we've had to say so far. As we say, it has been recorded, and we'll post the video to the YouTube channel, and the contact details are on the screen now. Should anybody have any follow-up questions to relay to us, or any feedback, that would be absolutely fantastic. And they do still have the kind of static page of supplier resources and help guides and management fee calculators, the likes, on our supplier resources webpage, which you can all access on the link that's on the slide there as well. But if that is everything, that's all we had to say. So everybody 20 minutes of their day back, and we'll let you all go. But thanks very much for attending, and do keep in touch and send in any questions that are needed. But thanks to the other panelists for taking part.